Delilah, a 20-year-old girl, sat on the edge of her bed, her fingers tightly gripping the worn-out blanket. The rain outside drummed against the roof of their house in Kasinga. She could hear the faint sound of her stepmother's voice, laughing with Willow in the living room. The laughter reminded her of everything she lacked: warmth, love, and a place to call home. Her heart ached as she thought of her mother. Delilah had never met her, yet the blame for her death followed her everywhere, like a shadow. Her father, Jace, a successful businessman, had made sure she never forgot. He was a man hardened by grief, a man who saw his wife's death as a direct consequence of Delilah's birth. Every word, every glance he threw at her was filled with resentment. "I wish it was you instead of her," he had once said to her, cold and distant. That sentence echoed in her mind constantly. Delilah wasn't foolish. She knew her father loved Willow more than her. Willow, his precious daughter from Sierra. Sierra, Delilah's stepmother, the woman who had never tried to hide her disdain, the woman who made every moment in the house unbearable. "Delilah, come here." Sierra's sharp voice cut through the air like a whip. Delilah rose quickly, wiping her hands on her skirt as she walked to the living room. She found Sierra seated comfortably on the couch, while Willow was busy scrolling through her phone. "Why is this house always dirty?" Sierra sneered, pointing at an invisible speck of dust on the floor. "Do you want us to live like pigs? You can't even do simple things right." "I'm sorry, Ma," Delilah muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're always sorry. Sorry can't clean the house, can it?" Willow mocked, not even looking up from her phone. Delilah swallowed hard, fighting back the tears. Crying wouldn't solve anything. She had learned that long ago. But it wasn't just the chores. It was the way Sierra treated her like a servant, while Willow got everything handed to her on a silver platter. Willow had new clothes, new shoes, anything she desired. Delilah, on the other hand, had nothing but the bare minimum: old clothes, leftover food, and the constant reminder that she didn't belong. The only thing Delilah had was her dream. She wanted to escape this life, to make something of herself. She wanted to become a lawyer, someone who could stand up for the weak, someone who wouldn't be silenced. But that dream seemed impossible now. Her father refused to support her education beyond secondary school, saying it was a waste of money. "You're better off finding a husband and settling down. That's all girls like you are good for," Jace had said one evening, when Delilah mustered the courage to ask him for help with her school fees. Delilah sat quietly in the corner of the room, folding her worn-out clothes into a neat pile. She was used to the sound of Willow's voice filling the house with constant chatter. But today, there was something particularly annoying about it. Willow was in the middle of her favorite activity, showing off. "Look at this bracelet, Delilah," Willow said, strutting into the room with a bright smile plastered on her face. "It's from London, you know. Papa ordered it specially for me. Do you even know what brand this is?" Delilah didn't bother looking up. She knew exactly where this was going. "Isn't it gorgeous?" Willow continued, twirling her wrist to make sure the light caught the bracelet just right. "I doubt you'll ever have anything this nice, but it's okay. Not everyone can be as lucky as me." Delilah clenched her fists but remained silent. She had learned long ago that responding only made things worse. Willow loved to see her squirm, loved to poke at her insecurities. "And this necklace," Willow added, leaning in closer. "It's pure gold. Papa said it's worth more than anything you'll ever own in your entire life." She giggled, tossing her long hair over her shoulder. "I guess that's just the way things are, right?" Delilah felt a lump form in her throat, but she swallowed it down. Willow's words stung, but they weren't anything new. She had grown up watching her father dote on Willow, showering her with expensive gifts, while Delilah received nothing but cold glares and harsh words. "Oh, and did I mention the shoes?" Willow pointed to the pair of sleek designer heels she was wearing. "Papa said I should have the best for my upcoming birthday party. It's going to be so amazing. Everyone will be there, except for you, of course. I wouldn't want you to embarrass me." Delilah's heart ached, but she refused to let Willow see her pain. Instead, she focused on the pile of clothes in front of her, trying to block out the noise. "What's the matter, Delilah?" Willow taunted, her voice dripping with mock concern. "Don't you like seeing nice things? Oh, wait, I forgot. You're not used to them." Without waiting for a response, Willow turned and sashayed out of the room, leaving Delilah alone with her thoughts. As soon as Willow was gone, Delilah exhaled, allowing herself a moment to release the tension. She glanced at her own reflection in the small, cracked mirror on the wall. Her plain dress, the one she wore almost every day, hung loosely on her thin frame. There were no designer clothes, no gold necklaces, no fancy shoes. But there was something else, a quiet strength that Willow couldn't see. Delilah knew one thing for sure. Willow might have all the material things, but those things didn't define her worth. One day, she would prove that. One day, she would show them all that true value didn't come from designer bags or golden necklaces. It came from within. Madame Sarah sat in her spacious office, tapping her long, perfectly manicured nails on the wooden desk. She was the undisputed queen of matchmaking in Kasinga, known to solve problems no one else could. People came to her with all sorts of requests, and she always found a way to deliver. Today, however, was different. Across from her sat Honorable Jake, the wealthiest man in Kasinga, his face etched with worry and exhaustion. The usually powerful man now appeared fragile. He had lost weight, and his once commanding presence had dulled. Madame Sarah, always perceptive, could see the desperation in his eyes. "Madame Sarah, I don't have much time left," Honorable Jake began, his voice low and strained. "The doctors have given me 3 months, 3 months at most." Sarah nodded sympathetically, listening intently. She knew where this was going. "It's not me I'm worried about," Jake continued. "It's my son, Wyatt. You know he's been crippled. I've given him everything money can buy, but now..." Jake's voice trailed off, and he struggled to find the words. "I need him to have a wife, someone to take care of him after I'm gone. I want him to be happy, to have companionship." Madame Sarah leaned forward, her sharp eyes narrowing as she studied Honorable Jake's face. "I understand, Honorable. What exactly are you asking of me?" Jake sighed heavily, wiping his brow with a handkerchief. "I need you to find someone, a woman who will marry Wyatt despite his condition. I'll pay handsomely for it. Money is no object, but I need this done quickly. Wyatt is unaware of my illness, and I don't want him to face the world alone." Madame Sarah considered the request carefully. It wasn't uncommon for her to arrange marriages, even under unusual circumstances. But this was a delicate situation. Wyatt was a ass, and while Honorable Jake's wealth would entice many, she knew this match couldn't be forced. "This will require a special woman," Madame Sarah said thoughtfully, folding her hands in front of her. "Someone who isn't just after the money, but someone who can truly be there for your son." Jake nodded. "That's exactly why I've come to you. I trust you, Madame Sarah. Find her, and you'll be rewarded beyond your wildest dreams." Madame Sarah smiled faintly, already thinking of potential matches. "Leave it to me, Honorable. I'll find someone suitable." As Honorable Jake left her office, Madame Sarah wasted no time. She knew she had to cast a wide net to find a willing bride for Wyatt. She made calls, contacted her network, and even posted discreetly online, explaining the situation in careful terms. The moment Jace saw the post, his eyes lit up with greed. He had always been a man who chased after money, no matter what the cost. The thought of Honorable Jake, the wealthiest man in Kasinga, offering a huge sum of money to anyone who could find a wife for his crippled son, Wyatt, stirred something in him. The offer was too good to ignore, especially with the added pressure of Jake's illness and the urgency of the situation. Jace quickly grabbed his phone, scrolling down the post and rereading the details. Wyatt had been crippled, but that didn't matter to Jace. What mattered was the promise of wealth, an opportunity he couldn't let slip away. Without a second thought, Jace dialed Madame Sarah's number. "Hello, Madame Sarah," Jace said, his voice eager and full of false politeness. "It's Jace. I saw your post about Honorable Jake's son, Wyatt. I believe I have the perfect match for him." Madame Sarah, who was always busy but never missed a business opportunity, responded quickly. "Ah, Jace. Good to hear from you. So, you're interested in the offer?" "Absolutely," Jace replied, smiling to himself. "I have a daughter, Delilah. She's a fine girl, obedient and hardworking. She would be a perfect wife for Wyatt." Madame Sarah paused on the other end of the line. "Your daughter, you say? But are you sure she's willing?" Jace's smile faded slightly, but he quickly regained his composure. "Of course she is. She's my daughter. She'll do as I say." Madame Sarah hummed thoughtfully. "I'll arrange a meeting with Honorable Jake and Wyatt. But be warned, Jace, this isn't just about money. Honorable Jake wants his son to be happy. He's not looking for just any woman. She must be willing and kind." Jace nodded, even though Madame Sarah couldn't see him. "Leave it to me. Delilah will do exactly what's required." After ending the call, Jace leaned back in his chair, his mind racing with the possibilities. This was it. His chance to secure wealth beyond his wildest dreams. He didn't care that Wyatt was crippled, nor did he care that Delilah's life would be turned upside down. All that mattered was the money. The next morning, Jace called Delilah into the living room. She approached cautiously, sensing the tension in the air. Her father's cold demeanor never softened when it came to her, and she knew whatever he had to say wouldn't be good. "Delilah," Jace began, his voice stern, "I have found a husband for you." Delilah's heart skipped a beat. "A husband? But Papa, Enough," he interrupted sharply. "You'll marry Wyatt, Honorable Jake's son. He's wealthy, and this marriage will bring great fortune to this family." Delilah's eyes widened in shock. "But Papa, I don't even know him. And you're talking about Honorable Jake's son, who... "Yes, the one who is crippled," Jace finished coldly. "And you will marry him. This isn't a request, Delilah. It's an order. We need that money, and you're the key to getting it." Tears welled up in Delilah's eyes. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her father, the man who had always despised her, was now trying to marry her off to a man she had never met, just for the sake of money. "But Papa," Delilah tried to protest, "this isn't fair. I don't even know Wyatt." "And you will do as you're told," Jace snapped, his voice rising with anger. "Do you think you have a choice in this? You should be grateful I'm giving you a way out of this life. Think of the wealth, the opportunities. You'll never have to worry about anything again." Delilah's head spun with confusion and fear. She didn't know what to say or do. Her father had made it clear that she had no say in the matter, and the weight of her helplessness pressed down on her. In the corner of the room, Sierra and Willow watched the exchange with smug expressions. Willow smirked as she folded her arms, clearly enjoying Delilah's misery. "I think it's a good match," Willow chimed in, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You should be grateful, Delilah. Not everyone gets to marry into wealth like this." Delilah wanted to scream, but no sound came out. She felt trapped, like a bird caught in a cage with no escape. Deep down, she knew her father had never cared for her. But this was beyond cruelty. Later that night, as she lay in bed, Delilah stared up at the ceiling, her mind racing. She couldn't marry Wyatt. She didn't even know him. But what could she do? Her father had already made up his mind, and in this house, his word was law. Tears streamed down her face as she thought of her late mother. If her mother had been alive, none of this would have happened. She would have had a say, a choice. But now, she was alone, facing a future she didn't want. The day had come, and Honorable Jake arrived at Jace's modest home, his face weary but determined. He had made up his mind. This was the only way to ensure his son, Wyatt, would not be alone when he passed. As agreed, there was no grand wedding, no lavish ceremony. Jace had insisted that Honorable Jake only needed to pay the bride price and hand over the promised offer. Jace, ever the opportunist, welcomed Honorable Jake with open arms, his eyes gleaming with anticipation as the money was counted and the transaction completed. To him, this was nothing more than a business deal. Delilah, however, stood quietly in the corner, her heart heavy with sadness. She felt like a pawn in her father's game, sold off to a life she had no say in. "Delilah, go with Honorable Jake," Jace said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Delilah didn't say a word. She simply nodded, her eyes filled with unshed tears as she gathered her things and followed Honorable Jake to his car. The journey to the mansion was a blur. Delilah stared out the window, feeling a mixture of fear, sadness, and uncertainty. She didn't know what awaited her at the Jake estate, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her life would never be the same again. When they arrived at the grand estate, Delilah was in awe of its sheer size and beauty. The mansion was unlike anything she'd ever seen before. Tall, sprawling, with elegant gardens and vibrant flower beds surrounding the paths. But despite the splendor, her heart remained heavy. Honorable Jake led her inside, and there, in the spacious living room, she saw him, Wyatt. He was sitting in a wheelchair, his eyes focused on the window as if lost in thought. Delilah felt her heart skip a beat. He was incredibly handsome, with sharp features, warm brown eyes, and a quiet strength that drew her in. Despite her sadness, for a moment, she forgot her grief, unable to take her eyes off him. But Wyatt, sensing her presence, turned to look at her, and their eyes met. There was a brief silence, and in that moment, something shifted. Delilah saw the pain behind his eyes, the frustration of a man who had been bound to a wheelchair his whole life. And Wyatt, in turn, saw the sadness in her eyes, a sadness that mirrored his own. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Slowly, Delilah began to adapt to her new life in the Jake mansion. Despite the circumstances, she made the best of her situation. She had vowed not to let her father's greed destroy her, and instead of wallowing in misery, she chose to focus on making Wyatt's life better. She stood by his side, showing him care, patience, and kindness. Every morning, she greeted him with a smile, wheeling him out into the garden and singing to him. Her voice was pure and melodic, filling the air with warmth and comfort. Wyatt, who had always been guarded and distant, found himself slowly opening up to Delilah. She had a way of making him feel seen, not as but as a man. She never pitied him, never treated him differently because of his condition. Instead, she showed him love in ways he had never experienced before. In the small gestures, the laughter they shared, the way she made him feel whole. As time went on, the bond between them deepened. Delilah's initial sadness faded, replaced by a growing sense of purpose. She wanted to make Wyatt happy, and in doing so, she found herself falling for him. Wyatt, too, began to see Delilah in a new light. She was no longer just the girl his father had brought into his life. She was the one who had filled the emptiness he had felt for so long. In that moment, Wyatt knew. He knew that Delilah was the one he had been waiting for, the one who had brought light into his life. And for the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. Inside the mansion, Honorable Jake watched them from the window. He had seen the way they had grown close, the way Delilah had brought joy into his son's life. A tear slid down his cheek, but it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of relief. Now, this is the right girl, he whispered to himself, and this is the right time. One evening, as the sun cast a warm orange glow across the mansion, Honorable Jake and Wyatt asked Delilah to sit with them in the living room. Delilah was puzzled by the seriousness in their tone, but she sat down quietly, curious about what they wanted to discuss. Wyatt sat in his usual spot in the wheelchair, his face calm, while Honorable Jake looked at both of them with a gentle smile. "Delilah," Wyatt began, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "There's something I need to tell you." Delilah's heart skipped a beat. She could sense that whatever Wyatt was about to say would change everything. Suddenly, to her shock, Wyatt rose from his wheelchair and stood up. Delilah gasped, her eyes widening in disbelief. For months, she had cared for him, stood by his side, believing he couldn't walk. Her mind struggled to make sense of what she was seeing. "Wyatt, you can walk?" Delilah's voice was barely above a whisper, her heart racing. "I'm so sorry, Delilah," Wyatt said, stepping closer to her, his eyes filled with sincerity and regret. "Please, let me explain everything." Delilah sat frozen, trying to process what was happening. Honorable Jake remained silent, watching the scene unfold, his eyes filled with a quiet sense of relief. Wyatt took a deep breath and began to explain. "My father wanted me to find someone who would love me for who I am, not because of my wealth. I've lived my whole life surrounded by people who only cared about my money and my father's status. When my father was diagnosed with cancer, he wanted to ensure that the person I married would be someone who truly loved me, regardless of my circumstances. So, we came up with this plan, to pretend I was crippled." Delilah's eyes filled with tears, but she remained silent, listening intently as Wyatt continued. "I pretended to be unable to walk because I needed to know if the woman who came into my life would love me for me, not because of what I could give her. I had no idea it would be you. I had no idea I would find someone as kind, as loving, and as genuine as you." Delilah watched as Wyatt knelt before her, his hands gently holding hers. "You showed me what true love looks like. You stood by me, made me feel like I was enough, even when you thought I was crippled. You never once looked at me with pity, and you never treated me as anything less than a man. I can't thank you enough for that." Delilah's heart softened as she looked into Wyatt's eyes. The betrayal she had initially felt began to fade, replaced by the overwhelming realization that everything Wyatt had done was to find someone who loved him truly. And she had. Honorable Jake finally spoke, his voice calm but filled with emotion. "Delilah, I couldn't be more relieved. You've shown my son the kind of love that can't be bought or faked. You've proven that you're the right woman for him. And now I can trust that when I'm gone, everything I've worked for will be in the hands of people who will cherish and protect it." Delilah wiped away the tears that had slipped down her cheeks, her mind still reeling from the revelation. But in her heart, she knew the truth. Despite everything, her love for Wyatt had never been about his wealth. And now that she knew the full story, she felt even more deeply connected to him. The next morning, Honorable Jake called for his lawyers. It was time to hand over all his properties, investments, and assets to Wyatt, just as he had planned. And with Delilah by Wyatt's side, he knew that everything would be taken care of. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the Jake mansion, casting a peaceful glow over the household. But there was an eerie stillness in the air. Honorable Jake, who had gone to bed the night before content and at peace with his decisions, didn't wake up. Delilah was the first to sense something was wrong. When she knocked on his door and didn't receive a response, her heart dropped. She entered the room carefully, only to find him lying still, his chest no longer rising and falling with breath. Meanwhile, back at Jace's house, things were rapidly falling apart. His once thriving business had crumbled. His investments had failed. And it seemed like misfortune followed him at every turn. His once confident stride had been replaced with frustration and desperation. One fateful day, while walking aimlessly through the streets, a prophet crossed his path. The prophet, an old man with wise, piercing eyes, stopped Jace in his tracks. "You," the prophet said, his voice strong despite his age, "you've lost something precious." Jace frowned. "What do you mean? Who are you?" "I am a messenger," the prophet replied, "and I bring a warning. You have lost a jewel, a treasure you never appreciated. That jewel was your good luck, your protection, and now, without her, you have nothing." Jace's heart skipped a beat. "A jewel? What are you talking about?" "Your daughter," the prophet said, his voice echoing with certainty. "She was your good luck charm. Ever since she left your house, your life has been in chaos. Everything that was once successful has crumbled. You pushed away the one person who brought fortune to your home, and now you suffer for it." Jace's mind spun with the realization. Delilah. Could it be true? All this time, he had despised her, treated her poorly, and now, the very thing he had cast aside was the source of his misfortune. The prophet's gaze softened, but his message was firm. If you wish to restore what you've lost, you must find her. Bring her back, and only then will you see your fortune return. Jace stood frozen, the weight of the prophet's words pressing down on him. The realization hit him like a tidal wave. Delilah, the daughter he had mistreated and cast off, was the key to his downfall. And now he had to find her. Determined, Jace set out to locate Delilah. He knew Honorable Jake had taken her after the bride price was paid, but he had no idea where they lived. After hours of searching and asking around, he managed to find Honorable Jake's office in Kasinga. He hoped to find some clues there, perhaps someone who could point him in the right direction. When Jace arrived at the office, he was surprised to see it bustling with activity. He approached the front desk, anxious and impatient. "I need to speak to Honorable Jake," Jace demanded. "It's urgent." The receptionist looked at him with a sympathetic expression. "I'm sorry, sir, but Honorable Jake passed away yesterday. His son and daughter-in-law are managing his affairs now." Jace's heart skipped a beat. Jake was dead. That complicated things, but it also meant he might find Delilah here. "Where are they?" he asked, his voice strained. The receptionist directed him to the boardroom, where Wyatt and Delilah were meeting with the lawyers to finalize the transfer of Honorable Jake's properties and investments. As Jace entered the room, he felt his heart drop. There, sitting side by side, were Wyatt and Delilah, deep in conversation with the legal team. Delilah looked different from the girl he had once known, stronger, more confident, and radiant in a way he had never seen before. And then there was Wyatt, no longer in a wheelchair, standing tall and composed. For a moment, Jace couldn't speak. The sight before him was overwhelming. He had come to find his daughter, to bring her back. But now, he stood face to face with the reality of his choices. Delilah was no longer the timid, unloved girl he had mistreated. She was now the wife of a wealthy, powerful man. And it was clear that she had built a new life without him. Delilah looked up and met his eyes. There was a flicker of recognition, followed by a cold, distant expression. "Jace," she said, her voice steady but devoid of warmth. "What are you doing here?" I came to find you," Jace stammered. "Delilah, please. I've made mistakes. I didn't realize how much you meant to me, how much you brought into my life. Please come back. The prophet said—" Delilah raised her hand, cutting him off. "A prophet told you to come find me? Now? After everything?" Jace swallowed hard, his shame clear on his face. "I've lost everything, Delilah. Ever since you left, my life has fallen apart. I realize now that I was wrong. You were my blessing, and I was too blind to see it." Wyatt, who had remained silent until now, stood up, his presence commanding. "You only want Delilah back because you think she can fix your life. But where was that care when she needed you? Where was that fatherly love when she was suffering under your roof?" Jace felt the weight of Wyatt's words, but his eyes remained fixed on Delilah. "Please, Delilah, I'm begging you. Come back home. I need you." Delilah stood up, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, there was silence. Then she spoke, her voice calm but firm. "Home?" She let the word linger. "This is my home now. You had your chance to be my father, Jace. You chose to treat me as less than nothing. I'm not coming back." Jace's heart sank. He had come to bring his daughter back, but he hadn't expected this. A daughter who had outgrown his neglect and found a new life. His hands shook as he realized the enormity of his loss. A loss far greater than wealth or fortune. "I'm sorry," Jace whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry, Delilah." But Delilah simply turned away, her back to the man who had never valued her, and walked out of the room with Wyatt by her side. The daughter he had taken for granted was gone, and with her, the chance to rebuild what he had so recklessly destroyed. As Jace stood alone in the empty boardroom, the weight of his decisions pressed down on him like a crushing wave. He had lost his daughter, not to circumstance, but to his own greed and neglect. And now, there was nothing left for him but regret. By the time Jace staggered back home, the house was eerily silent. Sierra and Willow had packed up and left, taking all the remaining savings with them. He was left with nothing but the echoes of his past mistakes. Days turned into weeks, and Jace found himself drinking heavily, wandering aimlessly through the streets of Kasinga, lost and hopeless. He had fallen from the heights of his once successful life, consumed by regret. Meanwhile, Sierra and Willow, who had spent all the money they left with, found themselves penniless. Desperate, they sought work, eventually landing jobs as cleaners in a large shopping center. The first day they saw Delilah walk in, they froze. Their hearts sank with shame and guilt. They tried to hide, but it was too late. Delilah had already seen them. Unable to face her, they broke down in tears, overcome by the weight of their past actions. All the cruelty, the mocking, the disregard for Delilah. It all came rushing back, and now they stood before her, powerless and ashamed. Delilah looked at them, her heart filled with a mixture of emotions. She had every reason to be angry, to turn her back on them, as they had done to her. But instead, she chose to walk away, leaving them to reflect on their choices. Later that day, Delilah received a call. Her father had collapsed in the streets, drunk and unconscious. Despite everything he had done to her, she couldn't find it in herself to be as cruel as he had been. She rushed to the scene, found him lying on the ground, and immediately took him to the hospital. Delilah cared for him, ensured he was clothed and fed, and eventually arranged for him to live in a house where he could find peace. One evening, as she sat by his hospital bed, Jace woke up, tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Delilah," he whispered. "I failed you as a father." Delilah gently placed her hand on his. "I forgive you, Papa. It's never too late to change." With that, a weight lifted from both their hearts. Delilah had chosen love and forgiveness over bitterness, breaking the cycle of hurt that had once consumed their family. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, please like the video, share it with your family and friends, and leave a comment. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell for more interesting stories like this one. Please share with us what country you are watching from. I really appreciate your support, and I don't take it for granted. Goodbye.